everybody, and welcome back to that CMMC show. Today, I'm joined by a goat, greatest of all time in the industry in relation to CMMC, John Kronick, ladies and gentlemen. And not only does he know CMMC, he's gone through this journey for quite some time in an industry that's very hard to navigate CUI requirements, and that is the AEC, the architectural engineering and construction industry. If I hear woes from any industry about CMMC requirements, it's construction because of so many different nuances and problems and kind of unique cases. Well, today we're talking to the expert. So, John, thanks for being on the show today. I want to just kind of open it up. Who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then who is this amazing company you work for, Tutor Perini?
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is John Kronick. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at Tutor Perini Corporation, also Director of IT Compliance, which is how I got thrown into the CMMC effort. But my background, I started out as a CPA. I was with Deloitte, and then I got into security. Over time, I got into information security. I was a CISO at many companies, Citibank and Estee Lauder, Gartner Group, and a few others, Prime Healthcare. But I did a lot of work in the federal space while I was a consultant on the other side of the table, and I did a lot of, surprisingly, a lot of 800 171 assessments early on. This is before CMMC. So I was familiar with it. And when I was approached for this position, the number one priority was to deal with CMMC and the coming storm. And this is 3.5 years ago. So you have to think, that they had made some initial efforts. So Tutor Perini, who is Tutor Perini? Tutor Perini is the 24th largest construction company. We have, it's about $5 billion in assets, about 10,000 employees. We construct everything from bridges and subways and airport extensions and military housing units and missile battery housing units and things like that. We don't deal with ITAR, so from a CMMC standpoint, we would only need to be a level 2 compliant entity. And so I was brought on about 3.5 years ago for Tutor Perini. Let me just say also, Tutor Perini is about 18 companies, and it's combined into this one company. And there's 4 of our companies that are dealing with CMMC requirements. And so when we looked at, when I was brought on and they had started working on CMMC, and they actually did a self-assessment, and they got up to about 42 controls compliant, right? And they would submit that score, and we would submit our bids, and we'd win the bids, and everything was fine. We're a big Pacific Ocean building company, right? So Guam is our big.
There's a lot going on in the Pacific these days, isn't there, John?
Right. And that was really the big push was there because with all the requirements for CMMC, when you're out in the middle of the Pacific, close to China, and you have to be CMMC compliant, you need suppliers and subcontractors that are out there, and that's a challenge. But we looked at Tutor Perini as a corporation, said, is it possible for us to be CMMC compliant across the company? With about 125 locations where we're doing projects, we said, no, we can't. It's just not possible to do it in the time frame that's needed and to keep it secured the way that it's required. So we said, okay, let's think about an enclave. Let's just zero in on 2 of these companies that we know have active projects that have CUI information. And we said, let's or that are going to be awarded contracts that have CUI. So we said, let's look at a building enclave. So we went early with the Microsoft Azure GCC High Cloud, thank God we went with a high cloud, right?
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
And we saved a lot of effort there. But the company that we use didn't do a very good job. And as we looked at the evolving requirements of CMMC, and this is, we were looking at the 7012 before this, the 252, 204-7012, and those requirements, and looking at the 800 171 R2, we said, okay, here's how we'll build the enclave. We'll put it together with these various tools. Well, when the 32 CFR was published, and they said, no, if you're going to use these tools, they have to be FedRamped. Or if you're going to be using a cloud provider, they've got to be FedRAMP, moderate authorized, or equivalent. And we're looking at our tools and like, oh, that's got to go. That's got to go. And we had to replace about 6 tools. Okay, 6 tools.
Wow.
Yeah, it was something else. What we were going to use for scanning, we had to get rid of that. What we were going to use for our SIM tool, I had to get rid of that. We had a product similar to Teams that would give us more control over anything we shared. We had to get rid of that one because they weren't FedRAMP. And so, one after another, file storage that wasn't FedRAMP, had to get rid of that. So, so we said, okay, what can we use? And we went out.
What's left at that point, right, John?
Right, and so we're looking at, and a number of those products that we were going to look at, they were in the middle or almost complete with their FedRAMP authorization. So we're like, all right, so let's continue on building our program, building our enclave, knowing that we're going to have to change out some things and bring on somebody else that can bring us to the next step, because the company that we were using wasn't really well versed in CMMC, and I had gone through the training for CCP, et cetera, and I realized, yeah, we have a lot of shortfalls here, and we don't really have the staff internal to do this. A lot of it, we were relying on our cybersecurity and infrastructure teams, but they were full out supporting the business. Okay. With 18 companies, we have a centralized IT staff. And so they're having to support all those companies. We have an Eastern region, Central and Western. We're all across the United States, and the Pacific. And we said, okay, we don't have the resources. So let's go find a company that we can. We looked at 4 different companies. And then, we actually chose some of 7, right? And
that's right, Buster. Right there.
And we really vetted them. We went through the whole 9 yards with them, and we looked at the services, and we said, okay, we want help to get compliant, but we want to have continued service, beyond that, obviously, right? We want to take a lot of this burden off of us, but we still want to manage, right? And so we started going down that path. And I said, as we're building the controls and putting these tools in, and we're swapping out, we went from the connection from our desktops into the enclave in the Azure cloud was initially through VPN connection, okay, to a VDI, and we swapped that out, and because we couldn't get multi-factor authentication working with, and that's another thing we had to swap out. So the MFA tool we were using, we had to get rid of that one and get a different one. And so we finally said, okay, the best way to do this is RDP directly in MFA into an AVD host pool. Worked beautifully. Okay. And then as we started building that, each company had their own AVD pool in the enclave. So we had 4 separate companies in the enclave, but none of them could overlap or touch each other's data. So it was great.
Oh, that's
perfect.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And we could replicate those. So we did. We replicated those pools by company. We did some sizing and optimization so that no one would be have any contention for storage, for processing, for any of the other activities they need to do. We had DLP implemented. We had everything that is needed. We had, and we finally got all the FedRAMP products in place. So we looked at the first thing was looking at helping to build all the components. And so we got 3 different services from Summit 7, right? And so it was Vigilance, and then Guardian, and then the last thing, which came later, was Commander, to help us maintain our compliance once we got it. So anyway, so we worked that through, and then I said, okay, as we're building this, and I know this control is now covered internally, we've got all the evidence and everything. So I wanted to have 2 different companies come in and do a gap assessment. And we weren't quite finished. We're still, going through the changing out of some products and everything. I had the first company come in, and they did a decent job, but there was things that they missed. Okay. I also had Summit 7's team come in, their compliance team come in and do their gap assessment. That was the final one before we had our actual C3PAO assessment. And when they came out with a few more things that we had to take care of. Then it was time to have our assessment. And we had, again, we had gone out to the market. We'd looked at about 4 firms that were known to be reputable, C3PAO companies. In fact, some of these I'd done personal work with outside of this company, in prior positions. So the company that we chose, we talked about some of the controls and said, what's your take on this? What's your take on that? And I thought we did pretty good, and they answered the questions. And then we said, okay,
I call it speed dating your assessor, right? It's like, it's good to get a few rounds in before you pick somebody.
Yeah. And even then, when you think, you're talking to maybe the director of CMMC services and the salesperson and somebody else there, when you actually get the assessors assigned, they may not have the same exact opinion as those that sold the assessment to you, right? So anyways, so we started going through that. Now, while we were about to have the assessment, the final piece that we had to swap out in our enclave was we wanted to get a remote printer for one of those locations. And we've gone through the whole industry to figure out, is there anybody out there that has gotten remote printing of CUI through an enclave? And we scratched everybody's,
Oh yeah, not many people, by the way, John.
right. So the week that we started the assessment, we had just put in the final piece of that remote printing. We had to swap out the firewall. We had to swap out the printer. We had to add the access control cards into that whole process for access control for the facility, cameras, everything. We got it, just as they were starting the assessment. So final documentation in the day they started the assessment, 3 days of documentation review of policies, procedures, artifacts, and evidence that we had accumulated. And by the way, we used a GRC tool to capture all this, and that was the Future Feed tool. I actually tried 2 other products, and one of them just wouldn't work at all for CMMC. The second one was good for CMMC, but it's too complex. It was just, you couldn't follow the path. So we chose Future Feed. We put all of our evidence, all of our policy procedures, everything in there. And there is a user access for assessors. So assessors can go in there, view all the information, and they can't they can't change the data, only read only. All right. So
That's cool.
so they started the assessment. and it was going pretty good. One after another, every day. And it was 8 hours a day. It was a lot, right? And it was show me this, show me that, show me the schedule. If you said you're doing it monthly, show me that you're doing it monthly. If you're doing it quarterly, show me you're doing it quarterly. Um, and this is probably the most intense audit that I've been through in 20 years. Right?
That's fascinating.
It was, and I used to do audits. I mean, I was on the other side of the table.
Because a lot of
So
people think this is like the same as an ISO audit. And I've heard multiple people say very different. CMMC it seems to be way more invasive of an assessment, I'll say, than something like ISO. And people just aren't really prepared, John,
yeah,
for the full burden and weight of what an actual CMMC assessment feels like. Until you go through one like what you guys did, like it's hard to even be able to articulate that well, you know?
yeah, and I'd already been through our uh, DC DCSA audits and things like that.
Mhm.
And nothing compares to this. This is more like a FedRAMP audit. Okay, if you want to know. Okay, it was that. So it not as much as FedRAMP, but it is very close in the way they dug through the evidence, mapped it back to the policies, mapped it back to the control, their interpretation of the control. Boy, we had to swallow hard on some of those because they were pushing it to the nth degree, and we had to make sure that we gave them the evidence to show that complied. We had a
It it
couple.
feel it feels like you're in court, doesn't it? It feels like
Yeah,
you have to be a lawyer and you have to have, like, your defense case, like, ready to go because they come out and they challenge so many things, and to your point, the person that sold the assessment might not be the same assessors delivering it, and they might have a different interpretation. So, preparing like you were to go to court is probably the closest I can recommend going into a CMMC assessment. You've gotta be firm in your boots. This is our position. This is our position. This is our justification. Like, this is all the things, right?
right.
And I know even through your guys' assessment, because we had talked about it a little while ago, there are even some unique controls that you almost had to arm wrestle about a little bit, right? That they wanted to deep dive in on. Do you mind kind of going into some of those just at a high level?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. Number one, um, they really dug into policies and procedures. So if you don't have policies and procedures really defined and communicated to your users, and show that they've been trained in those things, that's gonna be a ding against you. Okay, that's number one. They asked for things that may not have been exclusively or explicitly defined in some of the requirements. Like they wanted the disaster recovery plan, the business continuity plan, the business impact assessment, the security impact assessment, the risk assessment. All these things that they asked for.
Wow.
Thank God we do them. But for these other companies out there, I don't think they're going to see those. I've been in that business where I had to do all that. I had to do business impact assessments. So that was some of the stuff. And they said this, wow, your policies and procedures are really well done. We haven't seen that, in other assessments. So, that's great. But then they went in and started mapping to what that policy or procedure was to the controls and made sure we had the evidence and the artifacts to back that up. But then we came into some issues, and I'll give you one for instance. 3.1 20 was it 22? That one is oh no, I'm sorry, 13.12.2. That's the collaborative computing devices.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's a touchy one, funny enough.
Is it Yeah. So what the argument was, we use Teams in our enclave, okay? And so we don't allow collaborative computing devices like whiteboards and conference room audio and things like that, okay? But we utilize Teams, and they said Teams is a collaborative computing device. Now, we had gone to other assessors, and those other companies said, no, we don't consider that a collaborative computing device. And some of this C3PAO that we were using, some of their assessors initially had said it's not a collaborative computing device.
Because
But
it's
when
a
they
SaaS tool, right? Wasn't
Yeah.
that the justification? Like, it's
Yeah,
not a
because
piece of
Teams
hardware.
is a
It's
SaaS
not
tool.
a thing, you know? Yeah.
And what happened was, we gave them a lot of evidence to show and a lot of support for that. They came back with other evidence and support from, for instance, the 800 171R3.
Ah.
Okay. And
Which,
said,
by the
well, you
way, is
see,
not fair to bring in that definition to a CMMC assessment. That document
right,
might as well not exist, right?
right. And so then, now I have to say the director of CMMC, no, I'm sorry, the CISO of
Okay.
the C3PAO that we were using happens to be the chairman of the Cyber AB. So
Oh,
whatever he was going to
right.
say, okay, I guess we're going with your definition. So we said, okay, so what we did was to get around that control issue was we just disabled microphones and cameras on Teams in the enclave, and kept with our definition that says we prohibit collaborative computing devices in the enclave, and that solved the
Yep.
problem. Okay, that was one. Okay, another one that you don't think is going to happen is it was a 3.1.20 or 22, where it was on who's monitoring websites and social media for CUI or FCI data. And boy, did they go into that in detail. Well, fortunately, 3 months before we had our assessment, I read through all this documentation. I contacted our legal and our marketing. I said, we're going to have to make sure that we're monitoring this stuff, and that we have one funnel to review this before it gets posted, and periodically reviewing that to make sure nothing gets posted that shouldn't be there, and we can take it down. We put in a policy procedure. We got evidence. We got our marketing people to be signing off, and we had a very structured approach to that. And they were still the auditors were still sticklers on that. Well, let me see your evidence of sign off on that review,
Ooh.
and we had to provide that to them. So, fortunately, we had it. We had it long enough, and so they signed off on it. But again, it took a bit of negotiating on that. Like, you're going above and beyond. No one looks at all that.
No.
So so and there was some things that the auditors asked for that were outside the scope of CMMC, and we said, why are you going down that path? You need to stick to the audit. And they said, oh, well, it's just for our benefit. I'm like, okay, forget that. We got to get back on track here. Okay, so I think part of that was some pushback, but they weren't bending on anything. I can tell you, they said, this is what our interpretation is. We've done a number of these assessments. Everyone that we've done, went through according to Cyber AB, and we have the best track record, they said, and we don't let anything go that isn't according to CMMC. So I mean, that was a blessing and a curse for
Yep.
because
You
of the
pass with a
and
stickler, meaning you pass at a very high bar. So,
yeah. And so finally, the director called us and said, congratulations, you've passed. You pass on all 110 controls. We'll be delivering that letter. And I had to then hash all that data, and then give them the hashing algorithm. They posted that to the EMAS. I got an automatic reply from the EMAS system, said, you've passed at 110%, 110 controls. Your score has been updated automatically into the SPURS system. Congratulations.
that is
That's it. We're
fantastic,
good.
Larry. And you're good. Now, Here's what you just scared everybody about. I'll tell you right now, John. You said this journey began with you guys 2.5, 3 years ago in
2.5.
earnest around CMMC. The question that I know a lot of people watching this, there's a lot of people that have not started this journey yet, which is problematic, as we all know, because the pending 48 CFR and the contractual obligation to do CMMC is likely to be published around the October timeframe, right?
Right.
Meaning that you will not be able to be awarded work unless you can meet whatever the CMMC requirement is on the contract. But let's say, you're talking to an audience right now in the construction space, in the AEC space, like, when should they start planning to do CMMC, and what's the best way to approach this in an accelerated timeline?
Yeah. So we had this argument with our management for quite a while, and it wasn't until the last year and a half, literally a year and a half, where we put the fear of God into them that, look, if we don't get this, we won't be awarded contracts. Do you understand that? We had to show them in writing. This is what that's what it says. And
Wow.
then they're like, okay. So the president says, okay, um, if we throw more money at it, can you get it done sooner?
That, by
No.
the way, I literally, when DFAR 7019 came out in 2020, I had a 300 person construction company, a lot smaller than you guys, call me and say, blank check, make me compliant in 30 days. I was like, I don't think you understand how this works. We would love to take your money, but 30 days is unrealistic to implement all 110 controls. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? Yeah, that reminds me of something else. One of the things they look at is security awareness training. So they look at we're using a computer based learning management system. So it was easy for us to show. We push out this training, and oh, by the way, we require everybody in the company to go through CUI training through the DoDlearning.gov site, and you get a completion certificate. And we added that into our program so it was automatic. Every new employee that comes on, boom, gets through that training. I get the certificate. And so we got that for CUI training and insider awareness or insider threat training and cyber reporting. So all that got covered. That was an easy one for us, but it took a lot to get that in place. So this is the second year that we've run through that program, and it was it's been very successful. That's something that a lot of companies they don't have that in place, right? So if you're starting now, I was just talking to a construction company that's bigger than ours. It's up at the top, right? And they're just now trying to get going with an enclave. Now,
Wow.
hey, October. So we started, 2 years ago or whatever it was, and we said we think that this CUI or the CMMC program is going to be published at the end of 2024. That everybody thought that, right? So we're saying
Yep.
we got to get it done by then. Well, we realized we couldn't get it done by then, so we said, okay, we got to get it done by the first quarter, and we just kept pushing first quarter. And again, we said, it's not gonna make it because we got to still change out tools. We can't get the remote printing. So
Mhm.
fortunately for us, CMMC got pushed out, and then we said, okay, we got to be drop dead October 1st. So we're saying September. We got to get it done by September. So I said, okay, let's have 1 month, cushion. So I said
Yep.
to the CEO, we're going to get compliant by 8/31. That's our date we're promising you. Okay? Because we knew we were real close. So every 2 weeks we had to report to him what our progress was. And I kept saying we're still on target for 8/31, and I knew our C3PAO was going to be in on the job here, uh, July 14th through the 28th. Okay.
Okay.
So I knew if there was a poem, we'd have 30 days, maybe, because I didn't see too many things that they could come up with that we'd have a poem on and we get that complete. So I said, okay, we're saying August 31st, we'll be compliant. And we got in August 14th.
Man, ahead of schedule, John.
So, so you got
What
it.
I'm hearing from you is
You
you can
have,
plan for something, but
yeah.
doesn't mean you need to have an understanding that it will likely get pushed.
Yeah, you definitely need to plan. If you're starting now, and you're a smaller company, I would still think enclave. Think enclave
Okay.
because if you have multiple locations and you have no idea what CMMC is, it's going to be impossible. You're going to have to put physical security controls in every location where you're going to have FCI or CUI data. You're going to have additional protections for the CUI data, and you may not have the staffing to do
Yeah.
this. Okay. Now, I know a company that had 20 people allocated for CMMC and they still couldn't get there. 20 people. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Okay. I
Wow.
had I had 4 people here. It was actually myself and a teammate, and then I used 2 people from infrastructure to help with the enclave stuff. Other than that, it was just 2 of us, and here the other company's got 20, and they haven't gotten all their policies and procedures written yet. Okay,
That's
so
wild.
you got to have those. Number one, if you don't have policies and procedures and training in and proof that you've done those things and everybody's aware of those policies and that they're published on your internal website or whatever, they won't even come to do the assessment. They're going to say that you're not ready. And if you don't have the artifacts, if you're not doing the things your policies and procedures say, they're going to say you're not ready.
Yep.
So we knew that.
And that's a problem. Like you have to. I think I've said this before on the podcast. I was at a conference and a C3PO comes up to me and they say, Daniel, you're never going to believe this story. They're like, we had somebody sign up for an assessment. I said, oh, that's great.
Right.
They said, yeah, like we asked for their documentation as part of the phase 1 of the CMMC assessment process. And they said, nah, just come on site and interview our guys. They know everything. We don't have to review our documentation. And the assessor was like, what do you mean? Like that's the requirement of the assessment process. And they were like, nah, just come on site and interview our IT guy. He'll tell you everything you need to know. It's like CMMC, to your point earlier, it's a very robust assessment and certification program. Like you can't just fly by the seat of your pants, a cup of coffee in one hand and a good conversation in the other doesn't get you through the door. You have to be able to show it. And, I know we've talked a lot about the
Yeah.
assessment approach, the incredible success that Tutor Perini's had in the construction space, even more so now that CMMC, you get to hold that piece of paper in your hand, which is incredible. Like
Yep.
from a closing remarks perspective from you, John, again, talking to the AEC space, are there any like words of wisdom you want to lead them with or words of encouragement, um, just so that they understand like, hey, it's not hopeless. You can do it. It's
Right.
not easy, but like if you put your head down and you get executive buy-in, you can move the needle pretty quickly.
Yeah, you definitely need to get the buy-in. We have resistance from business units to spend the money and allocate it to them. They weren't willing to do that, and then it was the CEO of the parent said, "You're going to do it. We're going to fund it. So the money's allocated. You'll get charged for it later. That's the way it's going to be because we can't win the work if we don't have the certification. Period." It wasn't until that person, that CEO, said, "I'm going to drive this, and I'm going to fund it. They're going to report to me on this, and that's the way it's going to be." So we got top-down authorization and approval and direction, and they communicated that out to the business executives in the business units. The challenge that I see going forward is helping suppliers and subcontractors get certified if we're going to share CUI data with them. So what we're trying to do from a strategy standpoint is when we get an award that there may be CUI data, and now we're talking about the construction company, so a lot of this stuff is COTS products, which is exempt from CMMC. Okay, so we're trying to separate out the CUI from FCI and cost products and make them come into the enclave for the CUI, and for the COTS and everything, we keep that out there. They can do that all day long without having certification. So that's the only way we can do it. We're still going down that path to figure out on subcontractors. Actually, we're working with you guys to see what we can do on a program for that training. But if you're starting now, get those policies and procedures nailed down. Get that going first. Figure out, what is your scope for CMMC, and once you figure that out, and then you can try to build an enclave as a temporary solution, even, right? Get an enclave. It's so much easier. Okay, and but right now the assessors were telling me 75% of all the assessments they've been assigned, they're turning down because the client wasn't ready. Okay.
Wow.
So yeah. So what that means is, there are some assessors right now that are available because the assessments they were supposed to do either got pushed off, the company backed off, said, "Oh, we're not ready. We know that we're not ready, so we're not going to do it." So, if you haven't gotten there already, just know that you're in the same boat as all those other ones that thought they were ready, but they're not ready. So now they backed off and they're taking more time. I don't know what that's going to do to the defense industrial base when new contracts come out, right?
Yep.
And they need, bidders, but you still have time. But depending on the size of the company and things like that, maybe a 300-person construction company, it should be relatively easy to get an enclave, build out your policies, procedures, get the artifacts going, train up your people in that. You could do it in less than 6 months. You could.
Yep.
Okay, for a smaller company, but it will take dedication. It's going to take some money up front. I don't know, the CMMC, the 32 CFR, that one of those articles said, averaged about 109,000 to get compliant. That's ridiculous. It's going to take a lot more than that.
I would say that's a
well,
little,
I
that's a
should-
little
I
low.
should
That's
spare
the
ya.
federal
I shouldn't
government.
scare ya.
But it's assuming you have infrastructure, you have applications, you've got security tools and everything. But if you're going to go into the enclave, a lot of those tools will not work in the enclave. So you're going to have to figure out what tools would work in the enclave, and you're going to have two sets of tools, one for the enclave, one for on-prem or whatever outside the enclave. And just know that, it's going to, unless you get an MSP to manage those things like we did, your folks are going to have to manage two sets, and it's going to double your work effort. And you need to think about the strategy there.
You got to staff it somehow, internal or external. Someone's got to do the job. That means usually hiring internally or trying to find a really good external partner as part of that too, John. So, John, my friend, thank you for this interview. You have been able to shed a lot of light. I literally, before this call, before this podcast recording, I was on the phone with another construction company, literally verbatim, talking about the same problems that you guys were able to knock down. Getting a cert in your hand is great. The next challenge, because there's always another challenge, is the supply chain, right? And going through all of this, you've been an incredible partner of ours. We love working with Tutor Perini. We're so excited for the future success of you guys. And just want to thank you again for being on. And to all the viewers out there, thanks for watching. John, we'll have to have you back on for CMMC Level 3 certification whenever you guys decide to go after that one. So thank you guys for watching, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.